Law journeys are inspirational stories about motivation, resilience, and success. And your unique experiences, your unique journey need to be shared and can help others in their journeys. And today I have the distinct privilege of talking with Karla Ballesteros about her law journey. And Karla, I'm just so thankful that you're here. I think we can get started just with today. What are you doing now? What's your position and what kind of work do you do?
Thank you for having me. I'm currently an associate at a law firm called Troutman Pepper. My position is an incident response attorney. I sit in the privacy and compliance group and the privacy and cyber group. But my job as an incident response attorney is very specific in that I help organizations who are going through a cyber incident. So that can be from somebody sending an email with somebody's social security numbers to the wrong person to all of a sudden we have a organization whose systems are encrypted and they can't access their networks. And so that leads to a lot of notification obligations. And that's generally what I am handling on a day-to-day basis.
So Karla, the field that you're in, cybersecurity and data privacy and all that is, to me at least, pretty cutting edge. I don't know if you came to law school expecting to do that, but if you could share with us a little bit about how you ended up going into that field and what motivated you to pursue cyber.
Well, I went into law school thinking I was going to do immigration law. So ending up in incident response, it was completely different. And if you told me going into law school, I would have not believed you. But I think I've always had an interest in cyber because I grew up in the social media age. And so I always had questions about, well, what's happening to the information we're putting out there? And I know a lot of law school students hear this, but the internet never dies. And I think that was so new, such a new concept. Like, it's really hard to understand. And I think now, when you have an internet history that people can easily access, it's a little bit more daunting. And so cyber is so new and data breaches are so new, and how we're responding to data breaches is very novel still. And I think I was very fortunate to have that interest, and Loyola had the classes. There was one case, the Snapchat case, which is Snapchat's model was you send messages, you send photos, they disappear. And then they got in trouble because turns out that information does not disappear. Right. And so that poses a lot of questions of, how are you drafting privacy policies? Are you even adhering to your privacy policies? And then just other questions, well, what if it's a third actor who actually, gained access to your account? That's where my fascination came from. And I was very fortunate enough to be in a position where I can join the cyber field.
It really is fascinating. And there's actually a lot more we could talk about regarding that. And unfortunately, you'd have to educate me a lot on it because I didn't grow up in the social media era. But we're sort of right now where you are today. I actually want to take a step back and talk about how your journey unfolded and your early influences and your decision to pursue law. And starting off, was there a moment or a period in your life when you decided to pursue a career in law?
The one memory that does come to mind, and I think this is because that's the earliest memory I have of wanting to go to law school. I had come home. I got in trouble in middle school. I was in 7th grade. I actually had just gotten into a fight at school. And I came home stomping and angry because it was a fight at a school my mom had forced me to change into. And she, at the time, was a housekeeper at this wonderful woman's house. And I showed up being a brat, crying. And the woman just was candidly like, what are you doing? If you're ever gonna change your life trajectory, and I think she meant it in terms of like my parents, my mom who's a housekeeper, you got to get your act together. And I think that was one of the first times somebody sat me down and said, if you want to help your parents, and she meant it because my parents are undocumented, you should go to law school. And I think that's where the idea was born. And it always was in the back of my head. And I think, in high school, my brother had a similar conversation with me. I'd gotten my act a little bit more together, but it was like, if you want to change, our trajectory, you should do something with your life. And so I was like, well, I love to argue. So law school seems like a great idea. And I came with it with the intention of becoming an immigration attorney and being able to help my parents.
So I know you well enough to know if you were in a fight, there was a darn good reason for it. We don't have to go into the details because that's a really important story
Yeah.
about kind of a moment in your life pretty early on where you got some perspective and had, maybe looked at things differently, even though, like I said, I know you were fully justified in whatever action you took to defend yourself or others. So you mentioned you were in middle school at the time. Can you talk about your educational experience before attending law school, whether there was anything in high school or undergrad courses you took or experiences you had that further influenced or furthered your desire to go to law school?
I mean, I think it really stemmed from my like upbringing. I mentioned my parents being undocumented, and so it was always living with this fear that like something could happen, and that vulnerability. Professor Craig, you know me. I am a control freak, and so the fact that there's always been this thing in my life that I cannot control has just been a big driving factor. Um, and so I didn't grow up in the nicest areas, and I was a horrible student up until probably my junior year of high school when I realized this is when I have to start applying for colleges. That I was like, oh wow, I need to get my act together. It wasn't the best time, and I am very thankful that I even got to go to a good undergrad and make it to law school. But it was not something that I was always contemplating. Like higher education was never on the radar. My brother went to community college, and he's 7 years older, so it was never he really was the role model and he set the stage, but it was never something that was lined up for me. And I think, in fact, I had a high school counselor who was not encouraging. I don't feel like any of my high school teachers were really encouraging for me to focus on applying to college and I honestly just don't think anybody ever had the conversation of, this is what you need to do to go to college. And so that was hard when I finally made the decision to start applying to colleges.
And Karla, I think that's something that you touched on that is a common theme for students who are, in the first generation to go to college. And you mentioned obviously your brother's incredible influence and set the stage for you by him going to college. And so you talked about your junior year, you sort of made this decision that, you were going to kind of transition to be in a position to go to college. You didn't have a lot of support in high school. Was there anybody other than your brother at that time who was a source of support for you or was, encouraging you to go ahead and take that next step to go to college?
My mom definitely was like, there's absolutely no way you're not going to go to college. And so she was a force in that respect, but I don't think I had any support into like how to actually get to college or how to apply, how to navigate FAFSA. Like there was just it was such a foreign concept, and even law school and even now paying back my student loans, like there is nobody to tell you what the best option for you is. It's still navigating a world that I'm learning.
Yeah. Well, you're a quick study though, and obviously you've done really well. Um, Before we move on to talk about college, did you have any work experience or any other things you did in your time in middle or high school that you feel played a role, even if it's not law related specifically? And I'll tease something here, which is, I know that you ran a marathon at one point when you were in school. I've never run more than a mile, so I don't get it. But there's amount of discipline, there's amount of self-determination it takes to do things like that. I'm just wondering if you could share anything about experiences prior to college that also help define who you are today and how you got where you are.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I started running marathons when I was in high school, and there's a wonderful program called Students Run LA. It's just they bring coaches on, and the whole goal of it is to help students run a marathon, but they do it in a way where you're running a 5K, then a 10K, then an 18 miler, and then the full marathon, and there's weekend training. And it's a free program, and I just joined it to join it because I had wanted to get in shape and I liked running at the time. And now I also cannot run a mile, so but I used to do it, and I actually ran 3 marathons, so I at least have that under my belt. But I think what I loved about marathon running is that it was a challenge. Just I put on myself of can you hit 26.2 miles, and it is just such a mind game. And I think that's still why I talk about marathons in with such passion and joy, because I remember just you're fighting your body. Your body's telling you like, let's just stop, let's quit, and you have to keep going. And it was, I think when I ran marathons, it was never like quitting wasn't an option. It was just even if I go slower, I'm gonna finish it. And I never put a competition on myself of, well, if we're not gonna hit this certain time, we're gonna be done. It was like if I finish it, I get to say I ran a marathon and nobody can take that away from me. So I never really cared about my timing. Maybe I did the first year I started, but after that, I let my ego go with that respect because it was just, I get to say I ran a marathon, and that person who did it in 2 hours gets to say they ran a marathon, but we both finished. That's all that matters.
That's a fantastic way of looking at it. And, I've often talked about law school as a marathon when I've talked with students, and I may have even talked about it with you at one point. Do you see parallels between the experience of running a marathon in terms of the mental approach you just described, and then bringing that into the educational space, whether it be college or law school, and that same kind of idea that you had a goal and you're not as much worried about time as you are about getting to the destination? Do you see parallels there?
Yeah, I think like, in the library, you'll see people staying longer than you, or you'll see people leaving faster than you during tests. You'll see people getting up and, you might not even be halfway through. And it's sort of, that was the mindset I adopted while running a marathon of just eyes on your own paper, eyes on the finish line. Like, do not blinders, because you can't see what other people are doing. Other people might not even be breaking a sweat and you're heavy panting, but you also never know where anybody else is at. It could be that person is just sprinting miles ahead of you, but like that tortoise and the hare, you might outpace them at some point. It just, you have to give yourself time. And I think, both marathon training and, law school is the same. You just have to focus on yourself, focus on what you're doing, how you're feeling, and then you'll reach the finish line if you just keep at it. Because I knew I could always do better. I was just working part-time, and I was a commuter. And LA traffic, I mean, I lived in Hollywood and it's by UCLA. And so I was doing like an hour and a half every single day each way, and then making my way to my part-time job. And keeping up with the rest of my classes. And so it was a very demanding schedule, and there were other students who didn't have the demands that I had. And I saw how much faster they flourished than I did. And so part of it was, again, like a lot of it was my ego saying I could do this better, but I just couldn't push myself as much as I wish I would have. And I wish I had the luxury of not having to work during undergrad. I think that would have been different. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges I had, was having to commute, having to work part-time, and just trying to live my social life as well, and also excel at, my courses.
Something that I don't think is talked about enough is that, when students are applying to law school, and law school is very driven by quantitative measures, GPA and LSAT, primarily, that the GPA, for example, may not reflect all the other things that are occupying a student. So you talked about it, working, commuting. I wonder if we could talk about sort of the flip side of it, though. So now, as a lawyer, or even thinking about, when you were in law school, do you find that those challenges that you went through, the having to juggle work and commuting and school, even if it may not have resulted in the GPA you wanted, are there some aspects of that experience, though, that now have translated into success for you, whether it be in law school or in your career, because you had to go through that juggling act, if you will?
Yeah, I think, I mean, when I got to law school, I didn't have a job anymore, which is wonderful. I'm trying to confirm. I don't think I was working, or I think I started working the summer after my 1L year, but that was now at law firms. But when I got to law school, I was very involved in things. So I juggled both young lawyers. I juggled, being part of the La Raza group at Loyola, and then taking all my classes, the studying, the learning how to study. So there was a lot going on, and I feel like I was able to handle it because I was so used to juggling multiple things.
does that also translate now into your work? So do you find that, you're also juggling things, if not necessarily commute, school, and a job, but just with the responsibilities you have as a lawyer?
Yeah, I still handle my commute. I commute to work. The multiple things, matters, clients that we have, they're at different stages, remembering all of them. I will say the best thing that ever, um, from my background that helped me excel is working customer service jobs, because the legal field is a customer service industry. And if you're not used to customers yelling at you, then you might, get offended, you might cry. And I just let that roll off my back, because I know that, somebody's anger is not a reflection of my work necessarily, but it could be something else is impacting them, and causing them to react. And I think that's helped me have thicker skin. But the juggling certainly comes into play. And I think it flowed a little bit naturally, not to say that it's any easier, because it is still very exhausting.
Now, it's really interesting that you can look at an early experience in customer service and see that it's not just a job, because it is teaching you skills. And you're 100% right. As a lawyer, it's just a professional service business, but you've got clients, and they want you to do a good job, and they will present certain challenges to you. But I can see very much how that influenced you. Let's talk about law school. Were there any particular moments when you weren't sure about this journey, where you had any second thoughts? Were there any particular hurdles that you felt you encountered, or was it all just smooth sailing?
Definitely not smooth sailing. God, I think every single day I was just, did I make the right choice? But then it was always like, well, what else would I be doing? And there was nothing else that I can picture myself doing. And not to say that I regret it. It's just, it was really hard. I didn't know. I think one of the toughest questions I always face is, well, what type of attorney did I want to be? And that was really hard, because, like I said, I did come in thinking I wanted to be an immigration attorney. And I found that a job that I couldn't emotionally do. And not to say that I have anything against the immigration field. I think it's wonderful, and I wish I could. I just had a chicken heart, and my heart constantly was breaking because I couldn't help everybody. And so it just, what kind of attorney I wanted to be really broke me, because there's so many classes offered, and it feels like you have to make a choice so fast. And I felt like everybody knew exactly what they wanted to do, what they wanted to be. People were really passionate, and I just felt constantly behind. And I think that was the hardest part. It's never like, will I make it through law school? It's just, I don't know what I'm gonna do with my life.
Clearly, you figured it out, right? And part of the beauty of it being 3 years, and the first year is very much controlled for you with the core courses, but as second and third year come around, you have more choice. Were there any systems of support, any resources, any things that you were able to take advantage of, grab a hold of, that helped you to deal with some of those challenges that you just described?
Well, I was a wonderful alum of the the Summer Institute program. And so during my first year, I remember there were lunch and learns, as well as check-ins. And so that was really helpful from an educational perspective, of just making sure that I had a grasp of, the materials and resources available to me. I think the other driving force was my community, my social involvement in terms with student organizations, Solarasa, which I think is now the Latino Law Students Association. They were my rock. I still keep in touch with all of my friends. I think most of them are my bridesmaids or my wedding party. I mean, I saw them last weekend. I love them so much, and I would have not survived law school had it not been for them. And it was just camaraderie. I had people that I studied with. I had my group that I studied with every weekend. I had my group that I vented with, and we went, grab drinks and just de-stress. But they were my foundation for 3 years. And so I would have not made law school without them.
when it comes to academics, the courses, uh, did you develop over time any strategies for approaching the work, either the reading assignments or the exams, that you found more beneficial or more helpful?
I feel like I was a really bad student, and not in terms of grades. I never figured out how to study. And I think the week it clicked for me of how I should tackle law school was the week of the bar. And that really hurt me because I'm like, I think I could have done so much better in law school had it just clicked. Um, and I will say, like, I didn't deviate from what I did in undergrad or like how I learned. And it was my method of insanity, but it worked for me. So I was a big flashcard girl, and people would say there's just so many rules. Why are you flashcarding them? And it just, for some reason, the reading one thing at a time and the writing it just worked for me. And I did that for the bar too. And it was like millions of flashcards, and everybody called me crazy, but it worked for me. Or I would take my flashcards up to the parking lot, up on the rooftop of the Loyola parking lot, and that's where I would just walk in circles. The security guard probably thought I was going to jump at any point because I just kept walking all around the rooftop of the garage and just saying my flashcards over and over again until I memorized it. But that was the only way I knew how to study. I think there are better methods, but all I did was just not deviate and trust the process and trust that this worked for me.
One of the most important things about what you just said is that it is important to figure out what works for you and to go with it. That doesn't mean you can't explore other things, right? But it means that, in law school, you'll hear a lot of different opinions, different techniques. It's okay to try them, but ultimately you got to be true to yourself. And if that's what worked for you, then you should do it. And obviously it worked because you passed the bar. I wonder if we could just touch for a moment on what the experience was like for you preparing for taking the bar and then finding out that you passed.
I think I had the unique experience of studying for the bar for 6 months. I did graduate during the pandemic, and everybody, people say, "Oh, you had 6 months. You're so lucky." And I don't think anybody realizes that, these programs are designed for you to peak within a certain time frame so that you're at your peak moment, you take the bar. And, it was like Groundhog Day for 6 months of just studying. And, by the time the bar, they would set a date, you'd be out of touch with whatever you studied like 3 months ago. And so you'd have to restudy. And it was just awful. And I think, it was also another process. It felt like just a never ending law school exam. And then you had people, saying, "Oh, I'm at this percentage in my bar course," or you had people that could rattle off case law, and it's trusting the process and trusting that you will get through it. Even if you don't, it's not the worst thing in the world. You just retake it. But it is, when I found out I passed, I actually did not tell anybody, and I didn't tell my parents when the results were coming out. I kind of regret it. I didn't have that much confidence in myself. I've seen other students who film themselves with their parents and their friends and their loved ones, and then they all hug. I would have loved to have that moment, but I didn't have the confidence that I passed. And so I remember my parents, or my mom and my brother, were at the dinner table, and they were trying to talk to me, and I was just so snappy with them. And they were like, "What's your problem?" And it was because I was getting messages that the bar results were out, and I was getting messages of who passed. And I just could not focus on anything. And I remember I went to to my bedroom bathroom. I shut the door, and I was just crying already of like, I don't know what the results are going to be. And when I found out, I couldn't believe it. It's also a very underwhelming process because all it says is pass, but it just, your I guess it just, your stress, like this weight leaves your body, and I feel it now and it gives me goosebumps, but it is just, God, I never have to do this again. Thank you.
Karla, you said you found out you passed the bar. We talked about what that experience was like. So what came next?
So I graduated during the pandemic, and so I was studying for the bar during the pandemic. Found out I passed the bar during the pandemic, and it was not the prettiest job market coming out of law school. And I know 2008 grads are going to say we had it worse, and I believe them, but it was a very shaky time to enter the legal field. And I actually I had a post-bar job lined up, which was already hard to get, and I was very thankful to have it. But they rescinded their offer during while I was studying for the bar. And so that did not feel great, as I did not even know if I was going to pass the bar. I passed the bar, I didn't have a job. And so job hunting began. And I remember I even talked to you while I was studying for the bar, and you were just focus on passing. You'll figure out the job later, just focus on passing. And that's what I did. But it took me months. I think I found out well, there was I wouldn't find out if I passed the bar in January, but I took the bar in October. So there were months of just uncertainty and not even knowing what I could do, because nobody would hire somebody who didn't have bar results or wasn't a licensed attorney. And then by the time we all found out we passed the bar, other friends were already employed, starting their jobs, and I was still jobless. And the job hunting again was not fun. And there was a lot of times where I cried because I felt like I had to take a job, and I interviewed at firms and companies doing things I would never want to do in my life, but I just was like, I need a job. Um, but there was a little bit inside of me that said, well, you have a real big interest in cyber, just hold out a little bit and see if you can get a job that's in tune with cyber. And it took me, I want to say, like 3 or 4 months after passing the bar. So that was very hard on just in life in general and my self-esteem. Everybody was working, but I finally got some interviews lined up, and I actually had signed an offer with a firm, and I thought my life was set and this was amazing. They end up also resending their offer because I didn't clear conflicts. And that just was, I just remember crying, and I didn't even want to tell my parents because I was just so embarrassed and just lost. And that broke me, but I knew I had to keep going. And I fortunately had a mentor in law school who just heard about an opening at a job and just said, hey, it's not necessarily legal related, or you wouldn't be a licensed attorney doing it, but it is in your field of cyber. I'd say give it a shot. And that was a hard job to also apply to, in the sense that I didn't want to not be a traditional attorney. It wasn't a law firm. I was going in-house immediately. And it wasn't even in-house to be a cyber attorney. It was just in-house to leverage my legal background, but doing something completely unrelated. And I had to take a gamble of saying, well, I can take another job and be a practicing attorney for a couple of years, or I can just leverage being in the space and then hopefully end up at a law firm. And that's what I did. And that was really hard. I worked in-house for 2 years, and I just felt like I was being pigeonholed. And I felt, well, I'm never going to get out of here, or who's going to want to hire me? I've been out of law school for 2.5 years now. I have no actual practicing experience. How am I going to get hired? And that was, again, another constant battle. And I've just been very fortunate enough to meet the right people and just put myself out there and trust myself to end up where I am. Incredibly thankful to be a cyber attorney.
So yeah, all credit to, people who've helped you and all that, but I can't let you get away with downplaying your role in that, because you kept on making contacts, you kept on pushing your network further, and you bet on yourself when you took that job that was not exactly in the spot that you had envisioned, but that's a theme for you, that you bet on yourself, and you really can't go wrong with that. Not denying how you felt at that time, but on the theory that I've subscribed to, which is things do have a way of working out, and you don't know it at the time. Like at that time, it's just bad. But as it turned out, because of your willingness to make moves, the connections you had made, you got a position that was a non-lawyer position, but you leveraged it to get to the position you're at now. And that's, I think, a very important lesson for everyone, which is, and you alluded to this, but one door closes, you got to push some other door open, a window, whatever you got to do, you got to make it happen. And that's what you did.
Yeah, and it's trusting that if somebody or something is closing that door, trust in it. Because I know I probably wouldn't be a practicing attorney had I gone to that firm. I think I would have been burnt out. I would have not have become a cyber attorney because I was joining that firm just because it had a big name, and I would have had a fancy title, but it would have not been anything that I truly wanted to do. And so it was, I'm very thankful that I didn't take that job, right? That I didn't get the job.
You know, one of the themes in everything you described, it really is a resiliency, right? It's that, you know, despite the obstacles, despite uncertainties, even self-doubt at times, you have always kept moving forward. You've always, you know, moved your goal. You moved towards your goal, and you, you know, trusted your process, even when you doubted yourself, which says a lot, right? Being able to do that. And I agree with you. It is anticlimactic when you know, see you just pass. But I'm also glad that it at least has now sunk in for you.
Yeah.
And um, I, I I wonder if you could share a little bit about, you know, and that may be one of them, passing the bar, but you know, things you're most proud of, accomplishments, and just sort of looking back at your very young life, you know, just, you know, things that you look at and say, you know, yeah, I can actually really be proud of that, even if it was something you couldn't at an earlier time.
You know, I actually don't count the bar as something that I'm very happy I did, but I think, you know, my proudest accomplishments have really just been like the community involvement, being part of Young Lawyers, being able to mentor. Like I love my mentees. I love helping other students. And so anything that I can work with people, I really thoroughly enjoy doing. And it's something that I, you know, want to make more efforts of doing in the coming years. Um, but it's just, and I think the marathon, a personal, just proud accomplishment is definitely the marathon because it is just all about, I did this for myself and I'm my own competition. And, you know, and that's how I do try to approach life. I am my own competition. And I just want to help people. I want to make a difference. And I feel that's how I can make a difference. I also used to be a running coach for another amazing program called Girls on the Run. And so that brought my two loves together of working with girls and running. And so you would help coach girls run a 5K, but through the practices, you would teach them self-love affirmations. And so that was very wonderful. And it's a very wonderful program.
That obviously explains in part why Young Lawyers was something that you connected with so well. Just very briefly, can you share what Young Lawyers is for folks who may not be familiar with it?
Yeah, Young Lawyers is a program where Loyola Law School brings high school students from the surrounding areas onto the campus, and they are mentored by law school students to put together a mock trial. And so they are trained on the ins and outs of a trial. The culmination of the program ends with a mock trial. And so it's really nice when you see students who have no familiarity with the legal field besides what they see on TV, students who are shy and they don't say a word to anybody. And then at the end, during their mock trial exhibition, they are just shining. They're a force. They found their voice and now they're committed to going to law school. And that is just incredible to just see somebody find their voice.
Let's shift gears and talk a little bit more about your job now. And I wonder if you could share what you think are the skills, the experiences that contribute the most to your success now as a lawyer, and not necessarily specific to cyber, but you know, in sort of thinking about what you think makes for the most effective lawyer.
Yeah, I think I'm still learning that, and I think there's always room for growth. And I actually love the partner that I work under because she constantly tells us, "I think we learned a new lesson today," and it's you know, and she's like, "I'm always constantly learning," and so she's never called herself an expert in anything. And I think that's how I try to approach it as well, as I am constantly learning, and even more so because I am so junior. But I think that is a skill that not a lot of people have, is being able to be humbled and being able to grow from it. and learn from it. Other folks are so quick to say, oh, I already know this, I don't need to look into it further. But there is so much value in just taking a second look or second look, thinking more critically and thinking how you could do something better, take it to the next level. And it's so funny because this week I was complimented on how detailed my emails are. And that just came from my boss saying, you need to think more critically about this, and you need to be more detailed when you write emails, and seeing how she wrote emails. And so I adopted her method, but I'm now getting complimented of, wow, your emails are so concise and to the point and detailed, and I know everything that I need to now do. And it was just something that I learned along the way, and something that I still strive to do even better.
Let's talk for a moment about your family.
Yeah.
How do your parents and your brother feel about what you've done? Because they obviously saw you from the beginning in the evolution of your life and your experiences to this point. Do you all talk about what you're doing now, and do you have any sense for how they feel about what you're doing?
I think they're proud of me. Well, I know they're proud of me. I will say I know they're proud of me. I think they just don't know what it is that I actually do. And that is very fair, because you yourself have told me I have no idea what you do. And I think we just leave it at that. I also don't try to explain cyber. It is so unique, but I know that they are proud of me. I think I exceeded their expectations. And that's something my dad has told me of, you went beyond what I could imagine. I think I'm living a life that he couldn't imagine. Not that he didn't want for me, but just beyond his wildest dreams. And honestly, I think it is beyond my wildest dreams too. Like I've traveled so much now, I've done so much that I could not picture doing and being where I am now, especially looking back at my high school self and my college self and even my 1L self.
Well, and you have a lot more to come. So, as great as it is, there's so much more that you're going to do. And obviously, I can't wait to hear about it.
The biggest tip I can give anybody, just put your best foot forward always, and then those doors will remain open. And I think I've been fortunate because everybody, that I've met, I've put my best foot forward. And so they've immediately trusted me. And so when they say, hey, I know the person for the job, I might be somebody that comes to mind, because they trust my work product.
My experience with you is 100% consistent with that. You've always put your best foot forward. Before we wrap up, can you share, based on your experiences, any advice that you have for current law students, future lawyers out there, that the students will be coming through, young lawyers in this next year, folks who are just beginning their journey? Any advice you have for them?
Yeah, it's really just keep going. Find your community, stick with them, keep going. Your passion, what it is that drives you, will unfold and reveal itself. It's really just about trusting yourself and trusting the process. And it's going to be daunting, but hindsight is, lovely, and you will realize that everything was meant to be the way that it is. And things, doors might close on you, but they are for very good reasons. And I've had quite a few doors close on me, and I've cried about it countlessly, but it's all led me to where I am now, and for that I'm forever grateful.
Karla, I can't thank you enough. You epitomize what this series is about in terms of law journeys, and the inspiration that we can all take away from how individuals have charted their own course, how they've managed the ups and downs, and can't wait to see what you do next. So, Karla, thanks so much for being with us.